Let's settle this once and for all. iPhone or Android, who's been copying who? If you're team iPhone, you probably think Android's been catching up since 2007. But if you're team Android, you've been watching Apple roll out features like they just found out phones can do more than just text. Widgets in 2020 iPhone? Bold move. So today, we're diving in. Who copied who did it better, and why it actually benefits you. Sup, Rotten? Every year, either iPhone users accuse Android of stealing features, or Android fans say Apple is years behind. But are we even pretending these phones are different anymore? Because at this point, it seems that Apple and Android are just handing homework back and forth, and we're the ones grading it. This video, in no particular order, are laying out who stole what. Let's kickstart something going with a little questionnaire, shall we? But first, double check if you're subscribed yet. Liking and commenting on this video means you're endorsing whatever side you think is better. And for those of you who likes the wallpaper I use in my videos, it is now available in the link down below, so be sure to check it out to support this channel. And without further ado, let's get to the questionnaire. Which side had the first smartphone with fingerprint scanning technology? If you thought iPhone because of Touch ID, you would be wrong. The first smartphone to have a fingerprint sensor was the Motorola Atrix, predating the iPhone 5S by about 3 whole years. What the iPhone 5S had was the first capacitive fingerprint sensor, which created a unique identification from the image it generated from your fingerprint. So Apple wasn't the first, but they built on that idea and made it better. And it's still a technology that phones adapt to this day, including Androids. However, it was Android that initially got the ball rolling. But hey, Apple fans, I'll throw you a freebie. Which side was the first to premiere a smartphone with facial recognition? Now, if your answer was the iPhone 10 with Face ID, you would be wrong. That's right. Face ID wasn't the first time a feature like that debuted on a smartphone. The first time was the Motorola Atrix 2. Though it got popularized, enhanced, and secured because of Apple, they weren't the first to do it. Sensing a pattern, huh? Well, if you thought that was interesting, you haven't seen anything yet. But before we can get to the meats of the video, I would like to present TwoPan, this video's sponsor. Look, Apple is legendary for nickel and diming you with their storage upgrade tiers. And honestly, it's kind of ridiculous that you need to spend a few $100 just to get enough space to hold all of your cat videos without turning your phone into a slideshow. That's why the TwoPan Portable SSD is a must-have. It bridges that gap perfectly, especially for creators, photographers, and anyone working with high-resolution media. This isn't just your average SSD either. It comes with a built-in intelligent display screen that shows you real-time info like transfer speed, device temperature, storage health, working hours, and even charging power. No more guessing what's happening under the hood. It's all visible at a glance. Speaking of power, this thing features a USB-C charging port that not only charges the SSD itself, but also supports peripherals like external microphones, ideal for mobile setups or filming on the go. It also supports up to 2 terabytes of capacity with 1 terabyte and 512 gigabyte options, which means you'll never run out of space during a shoot or while backing up files. And with read and write speeds up to 1000 megabits per second, it handles 4K ProRes footage and massive files effortlessly. Oh, and it's got an advanced cooling fan built right in, keeping performance high without thermal throttling during long sessions. So if you're tired of storage limitations, mystery transfer failures, or overheating external drives, definitely check out the TwoPan Portable SSD in the description below. And be sure to use the code ROTTENT01 to get 30% off your purchase. And shout out to TwoPan for sponsoring this video and making a smartphone SSD that actually keeps up with the gear we use every day. So let's start with the features that Apple took from Android. And let's be honest, it's a longer list that some people might want to admit. For a long time, Apple prided itself on being different. But over the years, we've seen more and more features quietly show up on the iPhone that Android users had for years. Now, let's start with what features Android pioneered that iPhone later adapted. starting with the notification bar. Android users were pulling down notifications with quick toggles and grouped alerts way back. Apple added this in iOS 5 and called it the Notification Center. Cool name, but yeah, bit late to the party. Third-party keyboards? Android users had full keyboard freedom with apps like SwiftKey and Gboard for years. Apple finally gave in around iOS 8, and while we're on keyboards, swipe typing. Android had this down for ages. Apple brought it in with iOS 13 and called it QuickPath. Sounds fancy, right? But come on, that's a decade of typing like a caveman on iPhone. And for what? Home screen widgets? Android had them since day one. iOS didn't get them until iOS 14, and they still couldn't do anything at launch. If you're an Apple diehard, you just gotta take that one on the chin. There's seriously no defending that. Interactive widgets? Android users can pause music and tick off checklists. Apple just made them interactive in iOS 17. 17! That's a long time to stare at a pretty picture that doesn't do anything. Always on display. Android phones like the Galaxy S7 can show the time and notifications on a dimmed screen while sleeping. Apple finally brought this to the iPhone 14 Pro, and I'll be real, it's kind of overrated. All I see is a glowing battery drain. Focus modes? Samsung had Bixby routines for years. Smart tools that adjusted notifications and settings based on time, place, or activity. Apple repackaged the idea in iOS 15 as focus mode. Useful, sure, but definitely not new. Then there's MagSafe. Apple made it look cool, gave it a slick branding, and launched accessories galore. But magnetic wireless chargers? Android had that years before. Apple just Appled it. USB-C. You knew this was coming. Android's been using USB-C since, what, 2015? Apple finally added it to the iPhone 15 Pro. And let's be honest, they didn't do it out of passion. They did it because the EU dragged them kicking and screaming. Periscope zoom lenses. Samsung dropped that tech with the Galaxy S20 Ultra. Long-range zoom that didn't look like pixel soup. Apple added it to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. No surprises there. Voicemail transcription. Google Pixels could screen and transcribe calls before it was cool. Apple rolled out live voicemail in iOS 17. Late again, but hey, it works. And now there's the AI stuff. Google's been integrating AI tools like call screening, image editing, and summaries into Pixel devices for a while now. Apple's now diving in with Apple Intelligence in iOS 18. And let's just say the internet has its thoughts. The app drawer, Android's had one since 2010, a place to store every app without crowding your home screen. Apple waited until iOS 14 to introduce the app library. 10 years later. 10. Imagine how different my roasted home screen series would be if we had that feature way earlier. And judging by the submissions, iPhone users are still adjusting, clearly. They're still not used to that amount of organization. App locking? Android skins have had biometric security for individual apps since like 2016. Apple's only now adding native app locking in iOS 18. Shocking, I know. In third-party apps, Android's had side loading in alternative stores forever. Apple only allows it in the EU and only because regulators forced their hand. Fortnite might have done more damage to Apple's control than they did to your health bar, accidentally queuing up in build mode. Those guys are crazy, man. I'm never playing that mode again. And finally, RCS messaging. Basically SMS 2.0. Read receipts, typing indicators, better group chats. Android's been all in for years. Apple has had that with their own messaging app, but only for iPhones. However, Apple finally gave in 2024 after years of turning blue bubbles into a class divide, which they still do, by the way, but it's a bit nicer on the other side. Now, before we start our next segment, it is time for another questionnaire. Which side had the first front-facing camera? If you answered iPhone, you would be correct. But if you answered Android, you would also be correct. See, the front-facing camera premiered on both the HTC Evo 4G and the iPhone 4 back in 2010. And while the Evo technically was released first that year, it's clear that the concept was already set in stone, with the iPhone releasing later that year as well. But iPhone took it a step further, allowing you to FaceTime, so I think they kind of won with that one if you ask me. Another happy coincidence was the idea of a capacitive touchscreen. Premiered premiered initially with the LG Prada, yes, that Prada, months before the original iPhone. However, the original iPhone had a capacitive multi-touchscreen rather than a normal capacitive touchscreen, meaning that it had support for multiple finger gestures like pinch to zoom. iOS was built from the ground up to be a gesture-based interface instead of buttons, which the LG Prada was still using. Alright, we've talked about what Apple took from Android. Now let's talk about what Android definitely took from Apple. Because yeah, the iPhone wasn't just a trendsetter, it was the trend. I mean, the idea of what an Android even is was built on iPhone's roots. No, really, Google originally created the Android as a BlackBerry knockoff, but then after the iPhone launched, they completely switched their method. Android then released the T-Mobile G1 or the HTC Dream, which was a combination of those two. Judging from history, you can tell which one Android ultimately ended up going with. And now with the features. So let's go all the way back. The idea of what a clean UI even is. Before the iPhone, smartphones were cluttered, text heavy, and honestly kind of ugly. Apple introduced that clean icon grid layout with consistent design, and it pushed Android OEMs to seriously clean up their interfaces. No more chaos, just something that felt intuitive. And then there were smooth animations. Apple didn't just make things open, they made them glide. The whole fluid experience vibe came from a core iOS principle. Android followed suit with material design, and while it's great now, let's not act like that transition was immediate. Gorilla Glass? That tough glass you're probably watching this video through? Yeah, that started with the original iPhone in 2007. It's in basically every phone now, and it was Apple that kicked off the trend of using high-end durable glass in the first place. Gesture navigation is another big one. When iPhone 10 dropped the home button, it was a bold move, but it worked. Swipes became second nature, and Android caught up with full gesture controls in Android 10, and now, honestly, both platforms do it pretty well. But that jump started on Apple's side. Virtual keyboards? Typing on glass was weird until the iPhone made it standard. Before that, it was all T9 or slide-out keyboards. Apple normalized full-screen typing, and Android quickly followed. Siri might be the butt of a few jokes now, but it was the first world digital assistant on a smartphone. iPhone 4S 2011. That moment opened the door for Google Assistant, Alexa, Bixby. Okay, maybe we didn't need all of them, but it started here. The App Store? Apple launched it in 2008, completely changing how we think about apps. Curated, sandboxed, and kind of revolutionary. Android's market came after and slowly evolved into the Play Store we know today. And when it comes to the ecosystem, Apple nailed it. Copy something on your Mac, paste it on your iPhone. Get a call on your iPad, text from your watch. Have your AirPods automatically switch one Apple device playing media to another Apple device playing media. Android is getting closer though, but not quite there yet. Satellite SOS? Apple brought emergency satellite texting to the iPhone, and Android OEMs have been working to integrate similar features ever since. Long-term updates is a big one. Apple's giving devices 6 to 7 years of updates. Google and Samsung now promise similar longevity, but for years Android phones barely made it past 3. This shift definitely Apple induced. Stacked widgets, those little scrollable widget piles? Apple introduced Smart Stacks in iOS 14. Android manufacturers followed up with their own takes pretty soon after. And then there's the dynamic island. Yes, that pill-shaped cutout at the top of the iPhone that Apple turned into an animated UI feature. It became very quickly mimicked by brands like Xiaomi, Realme, and even Samsung. They wasn't even trying to hide this one. This one was kind of just insane. Like, they didn't need to do this, but whatever. Then there's privacy indicators. You know the little green or orange dot showing up when your micro camera is active? Apple rolled it out first. Android added a similar system right after. Feels like a no-brainer now, but it wasn't standard until Apple made it a thing. App tracking transparency, the feature that lets you stop apps from tracking you across other apps. Apple dropped it in iOS 14. It caused chaos in the ad industry. Android's version is still rolling out, but it's clearly following the same privacy-first narrative. Focus modes? Yeah, Android had do not disturb and digital well-being features, but Apple really polished the idea with contextual focus modes. Work, sleep, personal, all customizable. Android integrated comparable tools right after. Spatial audio. Apple made immersive sound a headline feature with AirPods and iOS. Android followed with Dolby Atmos and spatial sound support, but it was Apple that pushed it mainstream. ProRAW and ProRes, Apple introduced these high-end video and photo formats for creators. Android phones now support 10-bit video and RAW shooting, but again, Apple took it mainstream for the average creator. Screenshots, even screenshots. In Apple screenshot tools, markup, share sheets, cropping were super polished. Android eventually caught up with similar editing tools and gestures, but Apple's implementation was first and very user-friendly. Do Not Disturb was another sleeper hit. Apple made it simple, clean, and accessible. Android's version eventually got way more customizable, but it followed Apple's lead in terms of default behavior. Back tap. Introduced in iOS 14, Apple let users double or triple tap the back of their phone to trigger actions. Android mods and skins added similar functionality later. Optimized charging. Apple introduced this in iOS 13. Your iPhone learns your charging habits to reduce battery aging. Android followed with their own adaptive charging systems not long after. And finally, Find My. Apple launched a robust tracking network as far as iPhone OS 3. Now Android has Find My device, Samsung has SmartThings, and we've got a full-on tracker war going on. Oh, and Math Notes. The new Math Solver feature where you write out problems and solves them, yeah, Apple dropped that in 2014. And Samsung has something now too called Math Solver. They could have came up with a better name than that, come on. Last but not least, here's a fun one. The headphone jack. Ah yes, the removal heard around the world, no pun intended. Apple killed it first and took the heat for it, with Android even making fun of them in full-blown ads. And then, one by one, Android brands followed suit, even the ones who clowned Apple for it. Go figure. So yeah, both teams have different philosophies when it comes to enhancing the user experience. Apple never minded not being first, as long as what they brought to the table was best. In a lot of cases, it checks out, but not always. Whereas Android just takes what they think would enhance its phone experience and doesn't bother too much with making the identity their own. They'd rather not make their users wait. So who copied whom? Well, both. Here's the plot twist. They've both been quietly copying each other the whole time, repeatedly, shamelessly. And honestly, that's what keeps smartphones interesting. Every time one company borrows from the other, that feature gets refined, normalized, and better for everyone. What was once a gimmick becomes a standard. The war? Fun for debate. But in the grand scheme, it's just competition doing what it's supposed to do, making both sides better. But it doesn't mean I'm not going to give any of them flack for it. Which feature do you think your phone had first? Or which feature made you jealous of the other team? Was there any I missed? Drop it in the comments. And if you'd like early access to Ryan Apple videos, long before the public gets to see them, or even a little custom avatar to go along with your name, feel free to support me on Patreon along with my Ryan and Ryan Pro subscribers, Vasco, Francisco Beck, Sauer Kiri, Daniel, Glacius, Carbon Ranger, and Miss Game. Thank you all for the support as it keeps me dropping videos consistently, and thank you viewers for watching. If you want to see more of me, you know what to do. Not gonna lie, doing all this research for iPhone and Android features really made me miss the one phone that was at the top at one point, and that was the BlackBerry. I remember that little scroll ball would give me so much problems, but it was a great phone. Gone but not forgotten.